on the John Fredericks Radio Network. Joining us now is United States Trade Representative, Ambassador Gregory F. Doud. He is the President's Chief Agricultural Negotiator. We're going to pause just for a minute while we get a picture with the Ambassador. So we all have to smile at the camera. Ambassador, great to have you with us. John Fredericks, good to meet you. First time we met, you can put those headphones on.
All right.
If you want. Thank you. And look, I want to talk about USMCA. Ambassador, I want you to give us a little flavor. Now, we all know politically what's going on. Pelosi has it in her desk drawer. She won't pass it. Screw the American people. She doesn't want to give the administration a win, but she's hurting people as a result of that. But give us a little economic insight, sir, into the impact that USMCA will have in terms of, let's start first with just GDP, sir, and then let's drill it down.
Well, in agriculture, when you talk about NAFTA or USMCA, the context is very simple. Canada and Mexico historically are our number one and number two markets. When we aren't historically, before China really emerged on the scene, Canada has a little over, 30 million people? They're our number one market. We export over $1 billion worth of beef into that Toronto area. So of $145 billion in agricultural exports, Canada and Mexico today account for $41 billion of that. So that's just those exports in agriculture to Canada and Mexico, that's 1 million jobs. 1 million jobs in America. 70% of those jobs are not in agriculture. They're in processing, they're in manufacturing, they're in transportation. You know, we think about a major beef processing plant or poultry processing plant in Virginia. You have to keep in mind that there are thousands of trucks that go in and out of one of those facilities a day. They don't drive themselves.
When we're talking about just, let's just take Canada for example, and start there. So if we got rid of NAFTA, and I was opposed to that, I have to tell you, I was one of 3 Republicans opposed to that from day one because I'm a protectionist, to be honest. I think it was me, Pat Buchanan, and Donald Trump. Those were the only 3 people opposed to NAFTA at the time. I thought it was a horrible deal. But walk us through, just take Canada, dairy farmers, right? Mm-hmm. Simple example, right? Where I think Canada had like a 450% tariff on our dairy coming in, so we couldn't sell it in, but then they were dumping it in the U.S. borders, and we couldn't sell it back. Just take dairy farmers in Canada, the difference between NAFTA and USMCA.
First of all, let me help you understand that in agriculture we're not protectionist because 95% of our customers are outside the United States.
Right.
We look at everybody in the world as where we want to go. But Canada is unique in dairy, unique in the world. They have a supply control system like our old tobacco program used to be. So you have to have quota to have a dairy cow in Canada. And under that, they were trying to grow their dairy herd, grow their system. Well, they were dumping byproduct in third country markets. And we said, no. If you're going to have a supply control system, you've got to manage your supply. None of what you're doing there. So members of Congress, and I give all the credit to Ambassador Lighthizer, this is a very difficult thing to learn, dairy trade around the world. And members of Congress were very complimentary. Said, you were the first person to ever get a chink in that Canadian dairy armor up there as part of USMCA. We were able to get them to change what they were doing in terms of Class 6 and Class 7 and exporting stuff into third country markets. We got some additional access in there. We didn't, it isn't going to be perfect because of Canada's supply control system ever. We're not going to have unfettered access back and forth, but at least we have an ability now to keep them from hurting us in third country markets.
So if they do the same thing with timber, right? I mean, the Canadians dump timber in the U.S. under market prices, which hurt our timber industry and our loggers. How will that change?
I'm not familiar with the timber side of the equation. I just deal in agriculture. And there are plenty of things for us to deal with in Canada relative to that. They have a similar system in poultry, mm-hmm. and we really opened up the Canadian poultry market there. They've always taken a lot of our poultry because they can't supply it all themselves. We're able to open up that more in poultry and in eggs. fix the dairy thing, but pretty much in agriculture, everything else, all the tariffs were already at zero. One of the other things that we did that is really important template for us to use around the world is what we've negotiated in the use of biotechnology and technology in agriculture. And what we have in this agreement is something we can take to every other country in the world and say, this is what we're going to have. This is the gold standard.
So what is from where we are now, if you pass USMCA, Ambassador Doud, give us just in layman's terms, what does that mean to average American? Lay it out for us.
In agriculture, it is so important because what it sends as a message to the rest of the world, this is the template. This is the gold standard. If you're going to do business with us in agriculture, this is what you have to be willing to sign on the dotted line. Mm-hmm. It's just that simple. Everybody understands around the world in agricultural trade that our tariffs between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico have been at zero for a very, very long time. The amount of trade back and forth between our countries in agriculture is enormous. It's hard to believe that Canada, for many, many years before the emergence of China, with 30-some million people, was our largest export market. Mm-hmm. So this is a situation where now we take the template that we have with
the blueprint
with USMCA. These are the conversations we're having with Japan. These are the conversations we're using some of this with China. We're using some of this if we go to the UK and have a trade deal with the UK. It's very straightforward. We're not backing up from where we are to here today. This is the blueprint. This is how we're going to move forward.
So you've created a blueprint for agricultural trade, and you want to be able to negotiate those through bilateral situations to the UK, to China, to Japan, rather than an overall blanket deal like we had with the emergence of the TPP or something of that nature.
And agriculture is a little bit different. Why do we have an agriculture negotiator?
Right.
The answer is
why do we have an agriculture negotiator?
So much of this discussion is about sanitary and phytosanitary issues, non-tariff trade barriers, not the tariffs themselves, but all the other scientific and food safety and technological components of our trade that is very, very difficult to discuss with countries like Europe, which their system is diabolically different than ours in terms of food safety, with regard to China that really
has none.
Yeah, it's a challenge for them to have a regulatory system. So that's so much of what we do in agriculture, that these discussions are scientific. So that's why that template is so incredibly important. If you can agree on the science and on the technology and the food safety, the tariffs are the easy part.
So when the president, when POTUS says, I'm close to a deal with China, and if I get this deal done, it's going to mean billions of dollars in export trade for our farmers. How does your blueprint apply to that? Is that a fair question? Agriculture, farmers, soybeans, or whatever. So, how would that apply?
So I have spent over 30 negotiating sessions, hundreds of hours with my Chinese counterpart on this topic. Hundreds of hours talking about how the U.S. inspects its food, how we apply technology in agriculture, how we use biotechnology, how do we sell China things like infant formula? How do we sell them things like pet food? How do we have a discussion where they know our products are safe? How do we get to a regulatory system to a point where they trust what we do, we can do business together? We have spent hundreds of hours in these conversations, and I can tell you that the president is right. If we get this accomplished in agriculture, we sell them now in a good. So again, let's back up and give you the numbers. Our total ag exports are $145 billion a year all over the world. China's total ag imports from the rest of the world last year were $124 billion. In a good year, we've only done maybe 24 billion of that 124. If we get this right, do I think we can take that 22 or 24 to 40 billion? Yeah, I do.
Define getting it right.
Having access. For example, and I think this is just one story that we did last week. Mm-hmm. You saw where we opened the Chinese market to our poultry. Mm-hmm. 5 years they blocked us due to a thing called high-path avian influenza. We had one instance of it. Took us 5 years to reopen this market. We can sell China a remarkable thing called chicken paws, chicken feet.
Chicken feet.
Chicken feet. China, our industry says that we think what you've done here will open up a market somewhere in the neighborhood of $835 million to sell chicken feet to China. That doesn't count the poultry meat itself.
Chicken feet.
Chicken feet, the paws, $835 million. So we think when you add the legs and thighs, they like the dark meat, plus the chicken paws, it's about $2 billion.
For just that. I mean, it's just. But just as an aside, what do they do with the chicken feet?
It's like
Is it chicken soup feet?
Deep fat fry. It's like an appetizer. It's crunchy. They love it. Think of it like how we would eat corn nuts. You know, it's just.
Oh no, that's a good example. I thought you were going to say chocolate covered ants.
No, but it's
those are also.
It's a delicacy, and so these are so many things
so
that in agriculture, we in the beef industry, we say we sell everything but the moo.
I'm intrigued by your hundreds and hundreds of hours of face-to-face negotiation with your Chinese counterpart. And of course, we all get the stories, the back channel stories from Peter Navarro and Lighthouser, how just tough they are and how tough they are to deal with, because they'll sit there for like 6 months going over the same thing, right? Because they just outlast everybody. Just give us a little tidbit of insight in that hundreds and hundreds of hours without sharing anything confidential. But give us a little flavor of that, Ambassador Doud.
Well, I will share with you.
Is that a fair question?
I will share it.
Just share
and a couple of things.
Throw us a bone.
Number one, the language barrier is excruciatingly difficult. The difference in understanding what words mean. We've argued for an hour over what one word meant. To help understand, not an argument, but I say discuss, making sure that we understand what we're talking about. What we've negotiated in agriculture.
So you each have an interpreter.
Yes.
And so
and we've gone back and forth just to what we've negotiated is a pretty thick document, and just in agriculture alone, we've argued over every sentence. Be clear about that.
In a multiple 100-page document, you
I
have
don't know if
argued
it's that much, but yeah,
100-page plus several 100-page document. You've argued over every single.
It's not
sentence.
that much, but it gives you context. But so much of this is scientific, sanitary and phytosanitary, food safety, technology. How do you do this? How do you get from here to there in a point where we can do business?
Ambassador Doud, do they want to get this done, or are they just outlasting your government?
No,
outlasting your administration?
I can assure you, in terms of agriculture, they want our agriculture.
What is in it for them?
They need it. They have a situation in China right now with a thing called African swine fever. Half of the hogs on the planet are in China. They have a disease that will kill a grown hog in 3 days. There's no vaccine. There's no cure. If you look at pork prices in China, they've skyrocketed, doubled, tripled in the last year. They need our food. And they're not, this isn't a discussion about whether they want it or not. This is a discussion about how, from a regulatory standpoint, how can we understand each other and get through this. These are, and my counterpart has said to me, these are truly historic conversations. They've never had a conversation like this with any other country in the world before. And the really great thing about this is that, so how did we get to this point? We got to this point because we had a president that recognized the problem, and he does what he does. He stepped right into the breach. And he said, you know what? We're going to deal with this. It's time that we sat down and sorted this out. And that's what we've spent all this time, we're over a year, all this time working on.
Ambassador Doud, what was your prior experience? How did you come to the government?
I grew up on a farm in Kansas. My dad still farms. I own part of the farm. Been very, very involved in agriculture my whole life, 4-H, FFA, etc. I've been here in Washington 27 years, working on international trade issues in agriculture with the wheat industry, with the beef industry. I've traveled in over 40 countries around the world before I took this job. And so I'm an agricultural economist and commodity analyst by training. So I'm, with all the lawyers in the room, I'm the one economist.
Hundreds of hours of negotiating with your Chinese counterpart. I'm going to remember this conversation. Every time I get a little frustrated with a customer negotiation, I'm going to think about, okay, look, Ambassador Doud just spent hundreds and hundreds of hours with a Chinese guy arguing over one word in a sentence. So it's going to change my perspective on all negotiation here forward. And I'm going to be much more understanding to our advertisers and customers when I'm negotiating with them, because I'm not spending hundreds of hours. How does this thing end?
I don't know. I can't. I'm not optimistic. I'm not pessimistic. I want you to know every day we just keep working at it. Every day you keep having the conversations. You try to make progress. And believe in what you're doing. And know that, what you're doing is unprecedented. Nobody's ever attempted something like this before. We'll see what happens. Now,
do you report up to Chief Negotiator Lighthizer, or
yes.
do you report up to Sonny Perdue?
No, Ambassador Lighthizer.
Ambassador Lighthizer.
Yeah, so I'm one of his deputies.
And he brought you in?
Yes.
And how do you like working for the federal government?
Well, the only other experience I have in the federal government is I worked on the Senate Agriculture Committee for Senator Pat Roberts.
From Kansas?
From Kansas. So that was...
that was a while back there, right?
Back, 8 or 9 years ago. Just so a couple of years of doing that and a couple of years of doing this. Most of my career has all been in the private sector. So this is... I've been on the other side as an advisor to the negotiator for a huge chunk of my career. Now that you're in the chair, it's kind of stressful some days, I got to admit.
So when the president gets reelected in 2020, are you going to stay on?
Don't know the answer to that yet. We'll see. I got to get through this week.
Good answer.
All right, Ambassador Doud, thank you for being with us here on the John Fredericks Radio Network. I want to thank your assistant also. Stay by so we can get your stuff. I'd like to have you on again when time permits. So I thought this was a fascinating conversation. And a lot of our listeners throughout Virginia or in the farming community in central and southwest Virginia, I think your perspective would be very, very helpful with agriculture. But thank you for being with us, sir.
My pleasure.
I enjoyed
Thank you.
it. John Fredericks Radio Network.